Christianity, Democracy, and the American Ideal, a Jacques Maritain reader, compiled and edited by Jim Kelly. Chapter 4. The Heroism of the Plain Man. Courage and Democracy. Introduction. Maritain's vision of integral humanism contemplates a heroic attitude on the part of citizens and the state. For the citizen, a willingness to make sacrifices for the common good evidences an awareness of and a desire to work toward the rewards of eternal salvation. However, the sacrifices made by citizens yield a full harvest only in those instances in which the state similarly adopts the view that the vertical movement toward eternal life is as important as the horizontal movement of man through history. Only then will a state be prepared to risk everything for justice and love. Jacques Maritain. We don't believe paradise will arrive tomorrow. But if we want civilization to survive, the task to which we are summoned, the task we have to pursue with all the more courage and hope, because at each moment it will be betrayed by human weakness, this task must have for its objective a world of free men imbued in its secular substance by a genuine and living Christianity, a world in which the inspiration of the gospel will direct common life toward a heroic humanism. When man accepts death freely, not as an enslaved fanatic or blind victim, but as a man and a citizen for the sake of his people and his country, in that very act of extraordinary virtue, he affirms at the same time the supreme independence of the person in relation to the things of this world. In losing himself in a temporal sense for the sake of the city, the person sacrifices himself in the most real and complete fashion. Yet the person is not defeated. The city still serves him, because the soul of man is immortal, and because the sacrifice gives grace one more chance. Those Christians who are turned toward the future and who hope, even though it be a long-range hope, for a new Christendom, a new Christianity-inspired civilization, know that the world has done with neutrality. Willingly or unwillingly, states will be obliged to make a choice for or against the gospel. They will be shaped either by the totalitarian spirit or by the Christian spirit. They know that a new Christianity-inspired civilization, if and when it evolves in history, will be not a return to the Middle Ages, but a new attempt to make the leaven of the gospel quicken the depths of temporal existence. If the Western democracies are not to be swept away, and if a centuries-long darkness is not to come down upon civilization, they must discover in its primitive purity their vital principle, which is justice and love, and whose source is of divine origin. They must reconstruct their political philosophy and thus rediscover the sense of justice and heroism in the rediscovery of God. Nations that want to survive and live in peace have to understand that neither of these two goals is to be attained without clearly facing the risk of war. It is only when the existence of this risk has been acknowledged and accepted that it is possible to adopt a policy intelligent enough to obviate it. The European democracies understood this too late. Every democracy whose rule of life is not heroic but hedonistic will grasp such things too late. We have the right to call, not for a continual outpouring of collective heroism, but for the common acceptance of an ideal of heroic life, upon the heroism of the plain man. If the common life in which I am engaged is built upon injustice, one day I will have to look on with courage while the beasts skin me and my children alive. If common life tends toward justice, perhaps I ought to give up my skin and all the rest for justice. At least I shall have the expectation that my children will be happy and courageous as well. It is far better to run oneself ragged for the good than to run ragged for evil. These are simple facts. The time will come when the common conscience will understand them. Will Christians finally resolve to understand the proper law of Christian action? Or are they ashamed to be called children of the light? The question is not one of condemning or rejecting the means of force and physical restraint, if justly employed. It is rather a question of recognizing the importance of those means founded on moral or inner energy, on spiritual firmness, on personal courage, risk, and suffering. It seems very remarkable that in the great dictatorships with all their power, a single man who can say, "I do not agree," appears as an intolerable and extremely dangerous enemy. Why, if there is not in conscience, honor, truth, patience, and love, a certain hidden strength that the totalitarians fear? What I mean is that it is not enough to define a democratic society by its legal structure. Another element plays also a basic part, namely the dynamic leaven or energy that fosters political movement, and which cannot be inscribed in any constitution or embodied in any institution, since it is both personal and contingent in nature and rooted in free initiative. I should like to call that existential factor a prophetic factor. Democracy cannot do without it. The people need prophets. The people are to be awakened. That means that the people are asleep. People, as a rule, prefer to sleep. Awakenings are always bitter. Insofar as their daily interests are involved, what people would like is business as usual, everyday misery and humiliation as usual. People would like not to know that they are the people. It is a fact that, for good or evil, the great historical changes in political societies have been brought about by a few who were convinced that they embodied the real will of the people to be awakened, in contrast with the people's wish to sleep. In the reality of existence, the world is infected with lying, injustice, wickedness, distress, and misery. Creation has been corrupted by sin to such an extent that in the very marrow of his soul, the saint refuses to accept it as it is. Evil, I mean by that the power of sin and the universal suffering that it drags in its wake, is such that the only thing the saint has immediately at hand to oppose it totally is to give everything, to abandon everything, the sweetness of the world and what is good and what is better and what is delectable and permitted, and more than anything, himself, to be free to be with God. To do this is to be totally stripped and given over in order to seize the power of the cross. It is to die for those he loves.